girl, hey, welcome to With a Gay Twist. We are a bi-weekly podcast hosted by two homosexuals who talk about news, politics, and pop culture, but with a gay twist. And we're going to do things a little bit differently this week because
Just a little bit.
there's been a lot going on. First, let's get some introductions out of the way. I'm Zachary Penn.
And I'm Mason Dixon.
And joining us once again are, what are we going to call her? She's our go-to Russian military correspondent.
I love that title.
We'll go with that. Samantha Shay is back with us. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us again, especially during this very tumultuous week.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure being here, Zach.
We have brought you back because there's been a lot of things happening in Ukraine and Russia. In fact, I mean, as we were preparing to record tonight, things were happening sort of minute by minute. So as we were recording this is Friday night, February 25th. So when you hear this, things may have changed once again, and honestly, they probably will. But as of tonight, this is sort of how things stand. Before we get into the events of the last 24, 48, 72 hours, first we want to talk a little bit about some geographic terms. So you may have seen online the capital city of Ukraine, which is Kiev or Kiev, which we're going to talk about. But there's two pronunciations, there's two spellings going out. So there's K-I-E-V for Kiev and there's K-Y-I-V. The way that I'm understanding it is that K-I-E-V is a literal transliteration from the Russian alphabet, and that the Ukrainians spell it K-Y-I-V. So you might see those two different spellings, but they actually have some political connotation behind them. So I can see how some people would want to say, yeah, we're going to give the finger to Russia, and we're going to spell it the Ukrainian way. And there's also differences of pronunciation. So Samantha, tell us a little bit the different pronunciation differences in Kiev/Kiev.
Yeah. So growing up, I was kind of in a divided household in a lot of ways. My grandfather is Ukrainian, Jewish, born and raised in Odessa, Jewish enclave there. He is a victim actually of the Holocaust. He was displaced person as a very, very small child when the Nazis occupied Ukraine. But so 1/4 Ukrainian Jewish, 3/4 ethnic Russian. I was born in Siberia, and growing up, we spoke Russian in the household. We did not speak Ukrainian, though my grandfather, I do believe, does speak Ukrainian. And we always pronounce it Kiev, spelled K-E-Y-V. If I had to phonetically spell it in English, it would be Kiev. But I don't know if that is how the Russian pronunciation of the word is versus the Ukrainian pronunciation of the word, of the name of the city. In English, for some reason, they emphasize the V at the end. So Kiev, that is more of like the Americanized, westernized pronunciation of the city, which I guess they got from the Russian spelling of it, transliterated. And the Ukrainians have decided they wanted to take back their name of their city and spell it differently for the rest of the world. So the K-Y-I-V, kind of a more recent thing. And I do believe that they've done that, again, to put separation from Ukraine and Russia, to kind of give themselves more of an identity, be more distinct from Russia. So that's why I do believe now, like in Western media and all over online, you'll see the spelling of the K-Y-I-V, again, kind of the breakaway from the Russian ownership of the city's name.
Well, who would have thought that names could have political connotation? I mean, that's just so newfangled. So I think for now, because we don't have someone who speaks Ukrainian on with us tonight, that we're just going to go with Kiev until we get more information. But I think that we should just go with what we know and what we have available to us, to kind of err on the side of caution and not mispronounce the Ukrainian capital.
Yes. So now the last time we spoke, Russia had amassed thousands of troops on the border with Ukraine. No direct offensive tactics had happened just yet, but things were definitely riling up, and the chess pieces were being moved on the board in preparation for something. And then Putin formally recognized, I'm probably going to butcher these, recognized the Donetsk and the Luhansk republics, or the DPR and the LPR. How'd I do on this pronunciation, Samantha?
Pretty good. Again, for some reason, in Russian versus English, we'll emphasize an H sound in our words when Russians will emphasize a G. So the Russian pronunciation of Luhansk is actually Lugansk. So they'll say Lugansk. Luganska Respublika. Народная Республика, I think, is the whatever made up name, show name that they came up for the oblast.
Yeah, we have the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic is what Putin formally recognized as the two
kind of
Russian
breakaway regions.
You're right, yeah.
I'll call them the DPR and the LPR, so that we don't make our listeners suffer. But Putin formally recognized the DPR and the LPR as these independent states, which was really just a setup for him to absolve himself, so that if, I don't know, just I'm throwing it out there, just if maybe the chance or a likelihood of him invading was to happen just for sake of hypotheticals, then he's not actually invading Ukraine, he's invading these independent states.
Yeah.
Well, he's not even
asked to go for it,
Smith.
Yeah, he's not even invading at that point. He even said when he announced this special military operation that he was sending in troops in order to defend these the Russian people of these two areas from the radical Ukrainian neo-Nazis. So he established his own narrative, which, I mean, that's just what Russia has historically done, is to establish these narratives of the world is against us, the world is actively conspiring to harm us, so we need to be proactive in our defense. Kind of the idea of the best offense is a good defense, but they flip it and say the best defense is a good offense.
That's some good hashtag fake news.
Hashtag fake news.
Oh, there's even more, if you don't mind me chiming in a little bit.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Just
Please.
out of insane curiosity for myself, last night we put on some Russian state television just to see what their broadcasts look like.
Was that RT News by any chance?
We were watching RTV and what they call NTV, the national television station as well. So I was watching both of them just to kind of peek into their feeds and see what they're selling to the Russian people. They were claiming, in Donetsk specifically, armored columns of regular Russian forces rolling through Donetsk. The reporter was claiming that those troops were actually like indigenous forces that were pushing their own offensive into Ukraine to beat back the Ukrainian oppression, if that makes sense.
Yeah, recently Putin said that as well, that his military operations are not even fighting against Ukrainians, that they're fighting against these insurgents that are radicals there. So he's trying to even further distance himself from the idea that he is going in and invading a non-Russian territory, that he's going in there and defending the Ukrainian people from these radicals that are out to harm them.
Yeah, this is the slight distinction. What I'm saying is the Russian columns that were in Donetsk, the reporter was saying they're not even Russian troops. He was claiming that these are like indigenous forces to Donetsk. These are the Donetsk, the DPR's forces were the ones that were being shown on television, when in reality they were columns of regular, Russian armed forces troops like rolling into the city. So there's both of those things are happening simultaneously, but it's interesting that he was spinning that RT was spinning it in that way, because I hadn't heard that yet. I heard what you had said, where this is a defensive action to protect, you know, the Russian speaking peoples and the ethnic Russians living in those regions, in those people's republics. And so he had to send in his forces. I had heard that on through Western media, and I know that he's pushing that narrative. But it was interesting to hear from Russian state television that they're also saying that, oh yeah, these aren't even Russian troops. These are the indigenous forces of the DPR. That these are the DPR troops that have been, surrounded and beaten and brutalized. Now they're pushing ahead in their offensive to take back their regions, when in reality those are 100% like Russian army. That's all Russian army.
I have a question actually about Russian state TV. So you were watching, how were you accessing both of those?
RT is actually available on YouTube. I don't recommend anyone actually live stream any of it, because it's a lot of disinformation. I was doing it kind of for research purposes. I was out of my own curiosity. And the other one, the NTV, those clips I was watching actually via Reddit. People were taking snippets from having watched it, either watching it on their televisions or recording it online and dropping snippets of their broadcast through Reddit, through the Ukraine subreddit and the combat footage subreddit as well. So a lot of information I'm trying to get as much firsthand, what they call open source intel, from people on the ground. So Ukrainians, Russians, Russian military, Ukrainian military, anyone there with a cell phone or anyone there, getting direct information up and then uploading it. I'm trying to get the best on the ground picture, because to be frank, I I do trust Western media like CNN, MSNBC, but I'm watching their coverage of it. A lot of what they're doing is a lot of analysis and kind of speaking to the refugee picture of it. They're not really showing the combat picture, which is I'm really interested in that piece of it too, because I think that's going to drive the narrative of what happens next. So for the combat picture, I've been going to other sources, kind of on the web. So that's where I've picked up clips of YouTube of RT and the NTV for Russian state media.
Yeah, so another thing that has come up while we were really deep diving into what's going on in Ukraine and where Putin decided to make his start with this was that he stated that they were never a party to the Minsk agreement because Ukraine was not keeping up their end of that agreement from 2015. And specifically, under the Minsk agreement, which followed the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, there were 3 points in the 13-point layout that specifically refer to the DPR and the LPR. So point 4 was to start a dialogue on interim self-government for the DPR and LPR regions in accordance with Ukrainian law and acknowledge their special status by a resolution of parliament. Point 11 was constitutional reform in Ukraine, including decentralization with specific mention to DPR and the LPR regions. And then point 12 was about holding elections in DPR and LPR on terms to be agreed with their own representatives. So what we were curious about is how does this relate to Ukraine and Russia's responsibilities under the Minsk agreement? What I found isn't truly clear about what the expectations were on Ukraine and how Russia is trying to leverage this violation of the agreement to be in their favor.
Yeah, that's a great question. What we have to remember, though, is we have to look back to history. And there's 2 points in history that are very, very great analogies to what happened with the Minsk Agreement, leading to the open invasion of Ukraine by regular Russian forces and the Russian army. The first one was the Munich Pact, going back to 1939. I believe that's when the Munich Pact was signed, before the Third Reich in Germany invaded Poland and the official start of World War II for the European theater. The Munich Pact the Allied nations and the Axis powers met in Munich to stave off a potential world war where they annexed the Sudetenland, as the Germans called it, pieces of Czechoslovakia to give to Germany, because Germany was claiming there was ethnic Germans living in those regions, and there was um, German-speaking peoples in those territories, and they needed Lebensraum, living room, for the Aryan race, the German peoples. So what's funny is Czechoslovakia wasn't even a party to the Munich Pact. They were not invited to this to this agreement where they had to carve out a chunk of their internationally recognized territory and their sovereignty and their borders to the Third Reich. And the rest is, as we say, is history. Germany basically ignored the signed agreement and then eventually invaded Poland, and then invaded and occupied all of Poland and Czechoslovakia, and the rest of World War II followed. So that is a really great thing to look at, because the analogy is what happened with the Munich Accord. Sorry, not the Munich Law. The Minsk agreements. Russia created these in the Minsk agreement. There were these points to start this dialogue with these two quote unquote breakaway regions, Donetsk and Lugansk, LPR and DPR, because there's quote unquote Russian speakers, just like Germany claims in the Munich Pact that there was German speakers in Czechoslovakia, and Ukraine basically had a gun to its head to agree to these terms to avert war. They almost had no choice but to go along with it, hoping to kind of kick that can down the road and work out a diplomatic solution where they could keep their sovereignty and keep their borders and not lose those regions. The more important thing to point out, though, is just like with Germany that had no interest to maintain the pact, Russia never had any intention to ever let Ukraine maintain sovereignty over those regions, or more largely, as we see now, maintain sovereignty over Ukraine as a state. Putin and his government already made the decisions, in my opinions, in 2014, 2015, that eventually not only were those regions going to be taken, but probably he thought at that time that he could probably get away with taking the Ukraine as a whole if he couldn't make it into a puppet government like he had under Yanukovych, that he was going to use hard power, military force to force a regime change within Ukraine. So we can focus in on those points and we can discuss them, but I just think they're almost a red herring in this discussion. And as we see with what's happened, the rest is now history. We can talk about the Minsk Agreement. The other thing I wanted to bring up, the second kind of points directly to Russia. This is straight out of 2008's Russia's playbook. There's two regions in Georgia called South Ossetia and Abkhazia, where again, there are Russian speakers there, but those territories were Georgian. They're sovereign Georgian territory, Georgian land belonging to the country of Georgia, not to be confused with the Peach State for our listeners. The country of Georgia.
There is a country, people.
Called Georgia, and Georgia has two small little areas called South Ossetia was one of them, and Abkhazia was the second. And in 2008, under the pretense that Russian-speaking peoples, ethnic Russians were being oppressed by Georgia, the Russian military engaged in open warfare and occupied those two regions and continues to occupy them. And later on, they basically installed a puppet government in Georgia and derailed any future Georgian plans to have joined the European Union or potentially join NATO. So Russia put them under the thumb using this playbook, and Putin opened up that playbook again and did the exact same thing with the start of this conflict with the DPR and the LPR, recognizing those two Russian-speaking ethnic Russian regions, or attempting to, or sowing the seeds for their quote-unquote legitimacy within the Minsk Agreement for Ukraine to recognize them, and then using that pretense to then further an actual recognition of their independence, and then a complete invasion of Ukraine, as we saw in the last several days. So sorry, I spoke a lot. Apologize if I kind of derailed the conversation with that.
No, actually, that is a perfect segue to like our next question. And I mean, just sitting here thinking how doomed we are to
We're
repeat
fucked.
ourselves, repeat our history. I mean, I completely forgot about the situation with Georgia. I mean, of course,
Same.
remembering the Munich pact and what happened with Czechoslovakia, and like you said, the carving out of territory from an area that wasn't even a part of that accord. And then watching this happen, just mind blowing. Absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, it's slightly horrifying that we we just keep repeating ourselves. And okay, I'm sure we'll get into more of that, but a little bit later. But for now, okay, we want to get into a little before what's happened in the last 48 hours. So early Wednesday morning on February 23rd, Putin announced this special military operation where Russian troops entered Ukraine. Uh, it was done under the guise of, among other things, this quote unquote denazification of Ukraine, which is sort of interesting because President Zelensky himself is Jewish and has had family members who perished at Auschwitz, and so that's interesting.
Not to mention, like what Samantha was just telling us, Putin is pulling straight from the Nazis' handbook.
Yeah. hmm So, but he didn't only enter DPR and LPR, but he executed this very sort of widespread coordinated attack against key cities all over Ukraine. So he didn't even stick to what we thought was going to be the original game plan. So my question would be this: is what's the end game here? Is this just a matter of let's destabilize the country enough so that he can install some sort of puppet regime, or does he truly want to just take over the country and there no longer even be Ukraine, or maybe it's Ukraine in name only, but really it's just part of the new Russia, the new Soviet Union, the new Russian Union. What's his end game here?
It's really difficult to say. Um, I've talked to people still in the military and intelligence community about this. I have most of my friends still serve. They work in national security, and a lot of them are history files, just like I am. So we have a lot of discussions on this. It difficult to say is the right answer. In the best case scenario for Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin right now would be to force Ukraine to kind of agree to an armistice or a ceasefire under a Russian occupation. Like that is the best case scenario the for the Russian military at this point. If they can hold hostilities, if they could cease hostilities, um, I believe that following a ceasefire agreement in Ukraine, the next thing that's going to happen is basically an annexation of the L and DPR, and then the permanent installment of Russian bases and Russian forces in those breakaway republics, which will then probably join the Russian Federation at some later date, just like Crimea did, and potentially either a completely weakened, completely demoralized, but still quote unquote democratically elected and actually democratically elected government in the Ukraine, potentially with Zelensky, potentially not, someone else, and that leaving Ukraine kind of in this ruinous state that's under permanent threat from Russia to be re-invaded once again and re-bombed in the event that they still kind of make this uh, flow with the tide to join Europe. So they'll basically be prevented from ever going the way of Western Europe under that scenario. That is the best case scenario for Putin. I don't know if it'll work. I don't know to what extremes the Russian military is willing to go to kind of strong arm, literally strong arm Ukrainians, and if both the Ukrainian government or the Ukrainian people will actually fold under that pressure. I don't think that's going to happen. It may, because at some point, once if all of Kiev is completely bombed out, if every major city in the Ukraine is completely bombed out, if their economy, like if they can't feed their people, if there's no commerce, no travel, like these things are going to start happening very quickly in the country of 40 million people. So you do have to worry about the population and what's best for them, not just their future as a country, but like in the interim, you have to worry about them. But if they don't fold, then we move into a worst case scenario for Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, and that Ukraine becomes a hotbed insurgency. I mean, we're talking an insurgency like hasn't been seen in a very long time, if ever, because trying to occupy a country of 40 million people, the closest example that we have is with American military ventures in Iraq and Afghanistan. But even in those two situations, which ended up were ruinous for us, we lost in Iraq. I'm going to just say that out loud. And we certainly lost in Afghanistan. We had the support of the people, some of the people, not all of them, but the Iraqi people were happy when we overthrew Saddam initially. And the people of Afghanistan were supportive of us overthrowing the Taliban. That is not the case with the Ukraine. You're going to have 40 million pissed off Ukrainians that don't fucking want a Russian military occupation, that they're going to fight. And there is so much weaponry, so much loose weaponry from the Ukrainian military, and weaponry, we're going to probably talk about this later, that's going to be flowing into that country. It's not going to be safe in any cafe for a Russian soldier. It's not going to be safe for a Russian politician, for any of these people. They're going to be IEDs, mining up the streets, snipering. It's going to be a complete free fire zone against the Russian military occupation. And it's very difficult to imagine a world in which it could even succeed. Again, because there's 40 million people in such a large landmass, so many cities, and a diverse landscape. I mean, you're talking about woods, mountains, you have access to ports and the sea, and you're bordering countries that are openly hostile to Russia that are going to be willing to aid and support an insurgency against the Russian military. So what's Putin's end goal? His best bet is that first solution, but I don't think it's actually going to work out. I think it's going to be the latter, or it might transition from the first and then to the latter. But only time will tell at this point, but we'll see.
Yeah, and let's not forget as well just the sheer size of the terrain in Ukraine. Ukraine is the size of Texas.
Absolutely.
This is not a small area.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
Georgia. That's the thing. It's not Georgia where
yeah.
it's the size of the state of New Jersey where I'm from. This is a country that's literally the size of Texas, with plenty of places to hide, plenty of places to run to. So a partisan counterinsurgency is going to could thrive in this region. I mean, it's not an open desert like a lot of Iraq is. It's not this kind of desolate mountain region. Like this is that the best part is, here's the other thing that's one of my military friends brought up to me, and I'm like, yeah, this is absolutely the truth. When we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? Like primarily the American military it's like white people, and we're occupying countries of people that don't look like us. If you have the Russian military occupying the Ukraine, you're occupying a country of people that look just like you, that speak your language. These people are gonna it's gonna be stealth. Like they're never going to know who an enemy is. They're never going to see them coming. I mean, it's going to be brutal if it goes into that direction for the Russian military. Just to
The
think that they
call's
can pull
coming
off.
from inside the house.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like it, it's I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that option because it's going to lead to crazy bloodshed. But it's from just a clinical military perspective on it. It is going to be incredible to witness if it actually comes down to it.
Well, you mentioned President Zelensky earlier, and right now his family has been taken out of Ukraine, and they're in some undisclosed location for their own safety. But Zelensky himself is still there, and he I mean, there's images of him holding a gun, and he's fighting alongside his compatriots there in Kiev. So, best case scenario for him, worst case scenario for him. I mean, is are we looking at maybe a sham trial if Putin were to capture him? Are we looking at a just an immediate execution? Are we looking at him being exiled? What are we looking at in terms of Zelensky's potential future?
You know, I'm not in the mind of President Zelensky. I don't know what he's thinking at this point, but I can only speculate that based on his actions of staying in Kiev, and maintaining control of his government and his army, that he will probably fight to the end. I don't necessarily see a surrender option in his future. I don't think he's going to. He doesn't want those images either. He doesn't want to be paraded through the streets of Moscow, or put in a glass cage for a little kangaroo court somewhere in some Moscow region to be prosecuted for war crimes. I don't think he wants that. So I can't see a future in which that happens, but it can potentially if he's captured in an operation by Russian forces, that he would have no choice, that they'd get him before they would kill him. But I could see him spending a very long time in a gulag in Siberia if he is captured alive. But I don't foresee that actually going down, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, to me, it would make sense that Putin would maybe not want to go with a public execution because I would imagine that runs the risk of turning him into a martyr. And
Well, that's the thing. Russia officially doesn't have the death penalty. So
oh,
Russia doesn't have they don't have the death penalty.
I'm sorry, the United States has the death penalty and Russia does not.
Yes, that is a fact, officially a fact.
I'm
Now
sorry, I have
people
to
die in
reevaluate my entire view of my home country. I'm sorry, I'll be back in 20 minutes.
But don't get me wrong, Russian dissidents die in Russian prisons all the time, or people that aren't favorable to the Russian state or fall out of favor die all the time. They just die extrajudicially, if that's the word to use. They'll fall out of windows. They'll get hit by cars. They'll get poisoned with polonium. They'll get poisoned with Novichok nerve agents. All these things will happen to people that fall out of favor with the Russian state. But officially, if someone's put on trial and put in a gulag, their sentence won't be a death sentence. Officially, they just may die in custody, which sadly, if we look at the United States, that happens a lot too. I mean, most notable example recently, infamous example, is Jeffrey Epstein. Killed himself in prison. I'm not saying that he didn't kill himself in prison, but people die in federal custody and in state custody in the United States probably more often than we actually execute people.
Oh, most definitely. Oh,
yeah.
100% is.
100%.
Yeah, it is definitely like probably double, triple the amount that we execute people. That people are dying in federal custody. That's a little ridiculous, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole with
discussing that.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't think that he would be martyred. So they don't have the death penalty. He wouldn't be martyred officially, but if he died in state custody, then it just kind of Putin washes his hands off of that.
Insert gifs of whoopsies.
Yeah.
Here. So kind of wanted to get back to Ukraine as this place of importance, though. Still trying to wrap my head around why whole of Ukraine and not just these areas that he recognized as independent states. In his address that he made earlier this week, Putin said, "Let me emphasize once again that Ukraine for us is not just a neighboring country. It is an integral part of our own history, culture, and spiritual space." So I wanted to ask, one, what does he mean by Ukraine occupying a integral part of the Russian spiritual space? And then also, how does this fit into Putin's larger plan for a unified Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. why, I guess your first question that you asked kind of hidden there was like, why all of the Ukraine right now? And that's also a difficult question to answer. Before Russia basically went on their major offensive, this special operation, as Putin has declared, some of the retired generals were basically putting odds that a full Russian invasion was something in 1 in 3 chance of that actually happening. That the more likely scenario is what we even discussed earlier of recognition of the independence of the LPR and DPR and potentially a small incursion, but it's still an incursion and invasion of those republics under the premise that they're being invited into those regions that are now independent for protection. So,
Well, remind me not to ever bet based on their advice.
yes, the whole spiritual space argument that Putin has been making about Ukraine goes back to the history that we discussed in the last podcast, that a good chunk of the Russian origin story begins in Kiev and Rus, going back hundreds of years, over 1,000 years actually. That one of the first capitals of Russia was Kiev. So the Russian origin story starts there, and then it moves obviously to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and then back to Moscow. So, in the mind of a common Russian and in the mind of Putin, this Ukraine is a sister country of Russia. It's more than even like a sisterhood or brotherhood. It is the genesis place. It is like the place of our people. So
So could we just, to bring this to more, at least for me, Western theology, could we kind of liken how they see Kiev to how we could look at Egypt for the Jews, as far as the origin story, coming from Egypt, being pushed out by the Egyptian pharaohs across the Red Sea?
in some ways, yeah, I think a more interesting analogy, like an inverted manifest destiny, where in the United States history in the 1800s, we, under the doctrine of manifest destiny, it is the future of America to go and settle across the entire continent from sea to shining sea. We're going to establish an American state that's across all these lands. So, in if we want to bring it to the Ukraine and Russia analysis, from Ukraine is where they originated, and then moved north. There's a separate origin story as well. That's where they combine the two, from Finland down into Novgorod, and eventually settled Moscow later on. But this would be an inverted manifest destiny, where the Russians see, some Russians, not all, but in Putin's mind, sees the future of Russia going back to the origin land, to the Ukraine, to Belarus, to the Slavic regions, Slavic with Slavic people, and Slavic language grouped peoples. So he sees this as, well, they shouldn't have independence, and let alone should they have independence where they want to join the EU and military align themselves with NATO. That's not just a threat to Putin's vision of rebuilding, making Russia great again, but also in his mind, again, a political, military, and economic threat to Russian statehood if Ukraine, with 40 million Ukrainians, brother people of Russia, pull away and get independence, like true independence, complete break from the Russian state. So in his mind, he's justifying this action. So why Ukraine? Because he can't, in his mind, allow himself to let them get away, like they tried to do when the Soviet Union collapsed.
So, speaking of threats to Putin and kind of going this way, I mean, we can kind of look at Ukraine currently as more external, I would say, external people, because he's trying to reclaim that territory, trying to reclaim dominion over that state, that country. But not all is well within the Russian borders either. So we have reports of thousands and images of thousands of Russians that have taken to the streets of Moscow to protest what they now see as a violation of trust by Putin. Putin, in turn, has threatened arrest and harm to these protesters who are actively protesting what Putin has framed as a justified defensive military operation to protect Russian people and people of ethnic Russian ties. So, is there enough movement within the Russian border so that Putin should be concerned that he's going to follow in the footsteps of the very predecessors that he helped topple? Could he be facing another Bolsheviks revolution within the Kremlin because of his actions within the last 48 hours?
Yeah, that is a real possibility. It's a forked possibility. One possibility is some inner circle of Putin, the generals and maybe some of the oligarchs and some of the state security officials see the writing on the wall, see the direction that Russia's going, and internally depose him through a coup. That can happen. That is a possibility that I think Putin has been working to insulate himself from, to put people in positions that he trusts that wouldn't take that action against him. If you literally look up, and this is just one of those crazy things, if you look up any Russian intelligence agency, there's three of them: FSB, which akin to our FBI, the SVR, which is akin to our CIA, and the GRU, which is akin to our DIA, our Defense Intelligence Agency. So military intel, foreign intelligence, and then like basically internal intelligence service, which is the FSB. If you just look up any of those agencies, and more, I just did this with the GRU, the last like three heads of the GRU have all ended up dead. Either died mysteriously under mysterious circumstances, health problems, or one guy I think fell out of a window in his office. Like, pretty sure someone helped him fall out of a window in his office. So these are people that got to that position because of their loyalty and because of their belief in Putin and their support of Putin. They got to the highest levels of power within Putin's inner circle, and they still ended up dead. So there's still a chance, though, that even given that this happens regularly, this is just basically if you get put in that position, know that your way out is in a grave. That's your retirement plan if you're going to be the head of a Russian intelligence agency. Um, if you know that, there's still a chance, though, that Putin is going to go so crazy and get so unhinged um, in his actions that a coup can actually happen, that he will be internally deposed and removed from power. So we'll see if that comes to fruition in the near future or down the road. The other issue is what you brought up is that there are thousands of demonstrators in the streets that are calling for the end of this war, that are protesting Putin's actions directly, that are ignoring the orders of the government, saying ignoring the threats of arrest and a beatdown by Russian state security in the streets and getting a criminal record and being fired from their jobs. They're ignoring all of those threats, and they're still going out and protesting and demonstrating against Putin. There is a chance, again, if sanctions hold, if the Russian economy collapses, we're talking 1980s type collapse, where there's bread lines, where there's no toilet paper, that there's
Well,
no
the
heat.
ruble is on its way into like the center of the earth. I mean, 36 hours ago, it was already at 1 penny, one US penny.
Uh, but is it good enough? I mean, even if the ruble completely collapses, as long as people are still able to buy bread and milk, and vodka, they may not openly revolt. But if it gets to that point where they literally don't have gas in their cars, where they don't have bread to put on their table, where there's rolling blackouts throughout Russia because of an energy crisis, if it gets to that point, there's a potential. I believe then you can have that second type of revolution where the people rise up, where you'll have hundreds of thousands of demonstrators in the streets of Moscow, and they'll be asking for the head of the king, which has happened before. It almost happened, I believe it was either 2008 or 2012. There was a protest in Moscow. I want to say it was 2012. There was serious protests in Moscow, the largest demonstrations, and that's when a lot of these kind of internal reforms started happening, where the security state was cracking down on dissent, on opposition parties, on demonstrations, on gatherings, where they basically cut their numbers down, where you can't even have more than like several dozen people protest, and even then you have to get special permits, which are never even granted for them to be able to do so. So, but again, if we get to a point in Russia where your average Russian, can't feed their kids, yeah, I do believe you can have a, a revolution of the people, a populist revolution, not an internal coup necessarily, or one could precipitate the other. The popular revolution is asking for the head of the king and everyone, around the king, and then the people around the king are like, well, fuck that, like, we'll, we'll depose the king ourselves, and then to prevent the people from killing everyone. So, yeah, so hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, we're just sitting here with our fingers crossed.
If this happens, it'll be weeks, months, potentially even years away, because the sanctions have to take hold. The Russian economy has to collapse, and there cannot be like anything that Putin can do to stabilize it. So,
and sadly, it's going to be the Russian people who are going to have to suffer for it.
Yes,
and Ukrainians at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the low men on the totem pole who are the ones, in the bread lines, can't get milk, bread, or vodka. Which, in case anyone was curious, is Samantha really Russian? Yes, because milk, bread, and vodka are the staples. So that's the sad part.
Yeah, Oliver Twist. I'm seeing bread lines. I'm seeing soup lines.
Which happened. This is like the world that I was born into. I was born in 1987, and me and my family were in the Soviet Union, watching it collapse on Russian state television in 1991, 1990, 1991. I remember all that going down, all that transpiring. The currency is worthless, and even if you had currency, there's no goods to get from the stores. People go. Like that was a real thing that happened. So it's not ancient history for Russians, and they remember it. They remember the dark days of the 90s, which is a lot, ironically, why a lot of older Russians, are still supporting Putin, because they don't want to go back to the dark ages of like the late 80s and the 90s, where there was nothing, where it was just bedlam, basically. But ironically, Putin might be leading them in that direction anyway, based on his actions in the Ukraine. If the Western powers essentially go in the direction of embargoing, not just sanctioning Russia, but embargoing Russia and making them a pariah state, basically pulling a North Korea on them, where they have no goods, where they have no access to markets, where they basically are going to be starved into forcing the government to change.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And we are definitely going to talk about the sanctions in just a little bit. But we kind of wanted to just work through in a timeline fashion. So we talked about what's happened, or what did happen 48 hours ago. We kind of just want to talk about the current war status. So most military sites have been bombed or taken over. We know that Russian militants have occupied the airport that is 30 miles west of Kiev. So they have stated that they have effectively shut Kiev off from the Western powers. As we speak, civilians are being asked by Zelensky to take up arms, or have been for the last 36 hours, handing out ARs to anyone that is 18 years or older. Men aged 18 to 60 are being forcibly conscripted into Ukrainian armed forces to fight Russian militants. Literally, people that were walking down roads because their cars broke down were being pulled over by Ukrainian government representatives and said, "You're 18, you go back. Like, say goodbye to your daughters, mothers, and wives. You're going to fight Russia." So it just outpouring of reports of people being turned back from trying to escape to Poland or to these other safety regions.
Yeah, and Trump, Trump. I bet Putin, but I don't know. I think those are interchangeable, aren't they?
At this point, probably.
We won't even get into what's happening at CPAC right now. But Putin's...
Which isn't that far away from me, though. And the things that were said yesterday by DeSantis, I almost threw everything that I had in my home up in the air.
Death Santis. Now, Putin has been very vocal in his threats. I mean, both Putin and his cronies. Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that there would be, quote, serious military and political repercussions, unquote, if Finland were to be granted NATO membership. He said that if he's continued to be attacked in this way, that, quote unquote, the ISS, the International Space Station, will fall from the sky, unquote. He's even thrown out there the fact that he is a nuclear power. And while he's not made any direct threats to any particular place that he would nuke, he has just reminded everyone that he is a nuclear power. So to get dark for a moment, that is the end game of all end games, is when we start dropping nukes. And when he throws that out there, he throws that card on the table of, don't forget, I still have this card. To me, I would think, why would you ever want to even go there? Because you know that the moment that you nuke another place, you will get nuked back. And it seems to me that 2 nukes could knock out all of Russia. If you put one on St. Petersburg and one on Moscow, not that I'm by no means suggesting we do this, but you drop those 2 nukes on those 2 cities, and it seems like that's it. Your country is done. Why is he crazy enough to really think that he can throw out the nuclear option and consider it as a viable tactic?
So I don't know how much. I don't even know how to say this. How much stock you'll put into this, but in Russian military war games that take place in Western Russia, so close to basically where they war game out scenarios against NATO states or against, aggressor nations on their western border, so with Europe, they end these exercises with the detonation of tactical nuclear weapons. So in the United States, the way that we think of nuclear weapons, where our nuclear weapons are all strategic. We don't make a delineation between tactical, operational, or strategic, which for the non-military folks here, I'm sorry, I'm like getting into military speak.
I was just about to ask, can you clarify a difference? Because I'm like, well, of course they're going to be tactical, and of course they're going to be strategic. We're not just going to fly over there and say, oh, let's close our eyes and push the button now.
Right. So back in the day, this is, in the crazy heyday of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where we had all kinds of nukes. Everyone had nukes. They had nuclear bazookas. If you can imagine that, someone holding a bazooka and shooting a nuke, that was a thing that the United States invented and the United States had and the United States fielded to army units in Western Germany at the time, where in the event that, whole divisions of Soviet tanks go across the border, you can use what they would call these tactical nuclear weapons, these small nuclear weapons, because they're designed not for strategic ends, but for tactical purposes, for small outcomes. Now, we've moved away from that. We've gotten rid of a lot of those weapons, where now basically we only have 3 types of nuclear weapons. We have bombs that our bombers fly with the Air Force. We have missiles, nuclear missiles, which people usually think of when in terms of nuclear weapons as a nuclear missile. We have 3 missile bases in the United States. This is unclassified, I promise. Malmstrom in Montana, F.E. Warren in Wyoming, and Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. So we have these missile fields, like just empty middle of nowhere prairies, where every like quarter mile you'll have just this concrete bunker with a nuclear missile in there, a Minuteman III missile with um, park there. So we have thousands of those. And then the third type we have is sea launched. So nuclear submarines that have nuclear missiles, where we basically submarine launched ballistic missiles, SRBMs. So submarine goes into like close to an enemy country, and then will launch their missiles from boats and hit targets. But we consider all of our nuclear arsenal to be strategic. We're only like, it's there for deterrence, to prevent the other guy from ever thinking that he can win a war against us. Like our arsenal is there to stop them from ever thinking that. That's the biggest thing that our nuclear arsenal does, is for deterrence. Now, I'm not even saying that I agree or disagree. This is just like the U.S. nuclear posture as it stands. Russia has been moving, under Putin, of course, has been moving to a different mindset, where they view nuclear weapons, where they've broken up back into tactical, potentially operational, and then also have a strategic nuclear arsenal. So will nuclear weapons be used in a conflict with Kiev? It's scary to imagine, but it's not something we shouldn't not imagine. Like, this is something that is absolutely real. It is something that absolutely can happen. It's something that, as insane as it is to say, potentially we should be prepared for. The saving grace, if there is one, is again going back to why is Putin doing this, and is to reclaim the Ukraine. So it doesn't necessarily make sense to detonate a nuclear weapon on a territory that you want to reintegrate into your country and that you claim has your own people living in it. So why are you going to be nuking yourself, if that makes sense? But it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that if this conflict totally goes sideways for Putin and he loses the occupation of Ukraine, that out of spite or out of some other reason wouldn't detonate at least tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Ukraine or somewhere else, to show that he is absolutely ready, willing, and is going to use these weapons, kind of a projection of force against the United States and the rest of the world, to know that he's deadly serious.
So, just as a follow up for those of us that are not military gurus, especially when it comes to looking at military weaponry, I'm thinking when I hear nuclear, I'm thinking the nuclear bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The type of weaponry that you're speaking of, as far as the nuclear missiles that we have out in the middle of absolute nowhere, the nuclear weapons that we have stationed on those nuclear subs in strategic places across the globe, are those going to have the same type of impact as far as the same end result? Like the nuclear weapons that Putin could use in Ukraine, or the ones that he most likely would use, are we still talking about that size of an impact? Or
Well, a nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. I mean, the long term consequences of radiation, fallout, and destruction of an entire city, that still would happen even with a tactical nuclear weapon. But yes,
right,
you were talking, a tactical nuclear weapon would be Hiroshima, Nagasaki size. The yield of it would be about 20 kiloton, was what we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at max, something between 16 and 20 kiloton. So translation to what that means, what a kiloton is, a single kiloton is the equivalent explosive force of 1,000 tons of dynamite blowing up simultaneously. So 20 kilotons is 20,000 tons of dynamite blowing up instantaneously. So that is a typical yield for a tactical nuclear weapon. If you wanted to create like weigh out yields of weaponry, what the United States has in our strategic arsenal are much greater than that. I mean, back in the day, we had megaton nuclear weapons. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of what we have now, but I do know that the trend has been to making them smaller, so our yields aren't as dramatic because, again, nuclear winter, fallout, the destruction of entire cities, as opposed to, if you're involved in a nuclear exchange, maybe you just want to take out military bases or whole regions that have lots and lots of troop concentrations or whole navies. So you don't need megaton nuclear weapons for that type of warfare.
So they're getting more precise. They're taking a butcher knife and turning it into a scalpel.
Yes, but I don't want to say that if you dropped, a 100 or 300 kiloton warhead, that's a strategic level weapon. That is still 100,000 tons of dynamite being detonated. It's 5 times the size of the mushroom cloud that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Like that's our a single strategic weapon. Yeah, it's an insane thing to think about, and we have thousands of those, and so does Russia, and China's moving in that direction as well. They don't have quite as many, but they have enough of a strategic arsenal that, yeah, the world would say bye-bye. But in bringing this back into the Ukrainian picture, we're talking if Putin was to use a nuclear weapon, it would be a tactical nuclear weapon. It would be on the order of what had happened to Hiroshima or Nagasaki.
Well, I'm hoping that it doesn't come to that. Truly, I just don't currently see. And I said this before he even invaded because he was already hinting at that ace up his sleeve. I had this feeling that he was going to go this route of invading, and then we kind of do what I feel like we're doing now when it comes to military action against it, is we were not going to directly involve ourselves and kind of let things unfold, because Ukraine is not a part of NATO, and NATO has their own guidelines as far as what they will and will not do for non-members, which again is something that we're going to get into in just a moment. But kind of want to talk about the sanctions that are going on, or that have already been applied to Russia. I mean, there's just so much happening. We have numerous sanctions on numerous families of Russia, also some other families. I believe that there are some families of Belarus that have also had sanctions aimed at them, not as many of the Russian elites. We have a call within the EU to cut off Russia from the SWIFT banking system. And then we have even non-sanction actions going on. My favorite, by far, is the cyber group Anonymous. If you don't know who Anonymous is, they are this group of just brilliant cyber hackers, just waging cyber warfare right now on Russia. They have taken down the Russian Ministry of Defense. They have taken down the database website a few times now. They have actually leaked the entire database, which includes names, phone numbers, and emails of Ministry of Defense personnel. So they're blowing that stuff up. They've taken down some of the Russian news media sites as well. So they're just going balls to the wall against Russia in support of what is happening in Ukraine. But the main question that we have is, are these sanctions really going to have an impact on Putin? Because right now it doesn't seem like it. He kind of just said, screw you guys, I'm going to Ukraine. Not going home. I'm still going to Ukraine.
And even over the last couple of hours, we've looked at, because Biden has been asked several times, why won't you hold sanctions against Putin personally? It's been against the Russian oligarchs, it's been against sort of the Russian government, but not against Putin personally. And my understanding is he'd held off on that because it actually was a step too far, because we still need Putin in some ways. And yet now, I think over the last couple hours, we're now looking at, okay, no, we're doing it. We're going to actually issue sanctions against Putin personally.
Well, Biden was following suit with some of the European Union countries and some of the other NATO members, because that had been a discussion that was brought up, and the Ukrainian ambassador in that was petitioning NATO, I believe it was asking that they apply sanctions directly to Putin. And there were several countries that said, hold up, we can't do that, because we still need to be able to have open line of communication with Putin in order to do these diplomatic meetings, that be able to have a out should diplomacy reinvent itself in Putin's eyes. But it all comes down to, are the sanctions going to be strong enough in any sort of near future that might turn this around?
Putin has said directly before any of this even happened, he wishes that the United States levied every sanction that can possibly happen against Russia, because he wants to know everything that, like, he wants to be able to insulate him and his country from being able to be hurt by them. So I don't think that anything the United States currently has planned, or that is like has been thought of as rational to do, like they've done yet. I think that is even a separate discussion with what's happening with the Russian economy, because I mean, we live in a capitalist system. No one trusts the ruble, and no one wants to invest in Russia because of the actions of the Russian government. So, like, those are secondary consequences. America could have done nothing, and the ruble still would have plummeted, because who wants to do business in Russia knowing that, they are who they are, and it's a completely unstable market to be able to do business in. So that is like a separate thing that is happening to the Russian economy. That's nothing to do with what the United States is going to do or taking as actions. The other thing, the whole, well, we need an out. I don't think Putin, there's no rationally dealing with Vladimir Putin anymore. I genuinely don't think that he's a rational actor. I think he's going to do whatever he wants to do, period. So it will just come down to, well, what are we going to do to punish him? Like, just everything but the kitchen sink. Just throw at Russia asymmetrically, to punish them, the government and the entity of Russia directly. And yeah, it's going to hurt the people of Russia. Those are the people that are going to be suffering in the breadlines. But yeah, I don't think we've gone far enough in the sanctions. I don't think we've even been creative enough in the kind of things that I think we need to be do and we need to seriously think about. I mean, you go to New York City, there's an entire new neighborhood that went up since the last time I've actually lived in that area. It's called Billionaires Row, Billionaires Block. Just kind of Hell's Kitchen area. They built these massive skyscrapers. I wonder how many apartments there are owned by Russian oligarchs or by Russian business interests, or been kind of hidden away in secure funds to pay for them, but it's still being tied back to Russia. Like, I want government seizures. If we're willing to seize somebody's car because you found some weed in it and you suspect that they're a drug dealer, we should be able to seize a Russian oligarch's billion-dollar skyscraper in Lower Manhattan or Midtown Manhattan, because they're involved in war crimes in the Ukraine. That is the level of action that I think the United States people will demand, and I think that's the kind of thing that we have gotten to when it comes to dealing with Russia. Like, that is, short of any of that, then sorry, I'll get off my horse and I'll stop ranting. But
I'm hearing a wonderful like sub thread in everything you're saying of, why don't we use Rico like Rico's meant to be used? But
yeah.
That's just me.
Yeah, I mean, Rico,
and I love Rico, so
yeah. I mean, I hate the idea of asset forfeiture, like asset seizure, because I think it's unconstitutional. Like, we shouldn't take people's property away, like, without due process. But we're not talking about American citizens, under the judicial process. We're talking about, like, international actors involved in war crimes. We're talking about war. This is not we're not, they're not even in the United States. This is property that belongs to the Russian state, essentially, that is being used to propagate war crimes. And for that, we actually do have laws for it, and they can be indicted. Like, oh, that's another thing. Let's talk about that. How about putting indictments? I'm sure there's been American citizens that have already been suffered and probably died in the Ukraine, or dual nationals, Ukrainians like myself, someone born in the Ukraine or has family there that's also American, that have suffered as a result of the consequence of the actions of Putin. So where in the indictments? Like, why can't we just indict them like we've done terrorists and other, you know, crazy third world dictators and rebels in Africa? Like, there's whole groups of people that we just put indictments for. Let's start indicting Russian oligarchs for their actions in the Ukraine, in federal court. Start putting arrest warrants for them. Then you can actually go and seize their assets legally. It wouldn't even be like a treasury based action. You can actually get the entire Justice Department involved in this. So those are the type of across the board things that openly the United States should be supporting and doing. And I'm sure and again, I'm not plugged in to that world anymore, from the black side, from the intelligence community side, I'm sure a lot of that is already happening, in terms of the underground and kind of screwing over is the best way I can describe it. Russian oligarchs' access to money, access to their boats, access to their planes, just all of those type of actions. But again, we need to take it a step forward. We need to openly start doing these things. And a lot of it, I'm sad to say, I think London is the biggest one in terms of cities where Russians pool their money. I mean, they own a soccer team, for crying out loud. Granted, I don't know the political stance of Abramovich, but he owns the Chelsea Football Club, one of the most profitable soccer clubs in the world, a multi-billion-dollar sports team, like in London. He owns it there, and he makes money from it. So I think at this point, based on what Russia has done in the Ukraine, I actually think that the British government is willing. They actually have the incentive and the wherewithal to actually do the right thing and put an end to this, because enough is enough. And if this is enough, if this invasion of the Ukraine isn't enough, then I have deeper fears about the state of the world, period, and democracy in general.
Well, I know that sadly, you're ineligible to become president of the United States because you weren't born here. However, Samantha Shay for Attorney General to run the Justice Department? Can we make that happen?
Can we do that? I'll sign a petition right now.
I don't know, since the last time we talked, I got my paralegal degree, and I will potentially be working, I don't want to say the name of it yet, but on the faculty of a prestigious law school. So,
Yes, Queen!
Yes.
That's
Fingers crossed.
fantastic.
Oh my gosh, we have 3 law-focused degree holders on this podcast. That's
Look at us.
fantastic.
Just call us L Woods. But no, you brought up a really interesting point, though, Samantha. And in terms of, like, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we really stepping up more? I mean, one of the things we're doing right now is we are sending troops and arms to Poland, just on the other side of Ukraine, because that's where the sort of the dividing line is between NATO and not NATO. And we're trying to make sure that we are ready, that if Putin were to say, oh, you took Ukraine, great, keep going and enter NATO territory, that we would be ready for that. So we are sending a ton of humanitarian aid. I think it was $6 billion, I think, is what Biden announced today, of how much in humanitarian aid we were sending to Ukraine.
Biden has requested that Congress send $6.4 billion in humanitarian and military aid.
So that's great. That's wonderful, but we're not really offering direct military support. And
Officially, I'm just going to preface that. I don't know the exact, I'm going to speculate here, completely speculative. I would 100% believe that through the intelligence community specifically, and at probably regular military channels, arms are probably flowing into Ukraine. I think they've seen the effectiveness of the Javelin anti-tank missiles that were given to the Ukrainian army, and they've had great effect against columns of Russian tanks. There's videos all over the internet of blown out Russian armored personnel carriers and tanks. So
It's
the
pretty great.
Javelin it's a very effective weapon against regular Russian forces, and also Stinger missiles. There hasn't been that many air assets that Russia has lost. They've lost several, but I do believe that is going to be the next. More of those are going to be brought in. At first, NATO was very hesitant to even bring what they called lethal aid into the Ukraine because they didn't want to antagonize Russia. They didn't want to force Russia's hand into like having a reason to invade Ukraine. But when it was clear to everyone that they were going to do it, that this was already pre-planned, pre-staged, and then they did it, I don't think we really care anymore about providing, at least covertly providing, a lot of additional quote unquote lethal aid, direct military support to anyone in the Ukraine still willing to, grab a javelin and shoot a Russian tank, or grab a Stinger or some other anti-aircraft system and shoot down, MiGs and Fulcrum fighters and Sukhoi fighters. So I do think that is happening. They're probably just not advertising it, again, because that starts bleeding over into this questionable zone of, okay, if NATO is now directly, openly supporting a military effort against Russia, then will Russia take that as a reason to start, bombing Poland or targets in Poland or in Romania to stop the flow of weapons and arms into the hands of the Ukrainians? So I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to be critical of the Biden administration for not providing more lethal aid. They probably should be doing more. I don't know if I totally see why they wouldn't be doing it openly or not talking about it openly. But them even saying that they're providing, like you said, $6 billion worth of humanitarian and also military assistance. That's great.
They're throwing some javelins in there.
Yeah, they're coding it as defensive aid, and really the only promise that Biden has made is that he has said that he will not deploy troops to Ukraine. I don't believe that he has ever come out and said that he will not provide direct military aid other than just not sending troops. So I think that he also might be very strategic in his wording. His speechwriters are doing a great job because he's hedging his bets. He's allowing certain options to be left open and to be able to come back and say, well, no, I just said I'm not going to send our people there. I didn't say anything about sending, anti-tank weaponry. I never said that I'm not going to send arms over there. Just literally not putting American boots on the ground to fight in this fight currently. Which, let's talk a little bit about what's happening here in the States. Because MAGA country is all fucked up at this moment.
CPAC is like giving me like heart palpitations. It's so fucking gross.
It's ridiculous. So we have people like Steve Bannon and Eric Prince on their war room saying that, what Putin's doing is fine. It's great. He is not the aggressor. We have just this overarching MAGA strategy currently of saying Putin didn't invade Ukraine under Trump, which means that he saw Trump as strong, but under Trump, he didn't have to invade. There was this sense of Trump was already doing more to remove the NATO threat than an invasion at that point could.
Because that was at the point of our country when literally the call was coming from inside the house. And he's in the White House. He's in the White House actively working to defund NATO and not keep our NATO allies as strong as they are.
Literally was pissing them off left and right. We left, international accord, international agreement, left, right, center. I mean, every time we turned around, Trump was talking about, well, we're going to leave this because it's not fruitful for America for whatever reason he could invent. Um, but a question that I have as I'm listening to all these MAGAs go on and on about Putin not taking these actions under Trump and how Putin is not the aggressor is, do we think that Putin was gearing up for an invasion as early as the Trump administration with the visit of the 7 US Republican senators that visited in 2018? Like, what do you think that there was any coordination whatsoever? Maybe just testing the waters, especially with Trump trying to get Ukraine to open an investigation against Biden during the last campaign and then getting pissed off at them because they wouldn't do it.
We have to hypothesize a lot, but where to even begin answering this question? I do think that there, as insane as it is to say, there is some twisted logic in what the MAGA mouth breather, like foaming at the mouth folks are saying, in the sense that, and let me caveat, I think Putin, if Trump was reelected, I think there would be a hesitancy to have done such a thing in the Ukraine if Trump was president. And the only reason I say that is because he did not want to isolate Donald Trump. Like, he saw Trump as a potential ally. He knew that Trump wanted to pull away from NATO and basically divest from our military agreements and military alliances in Europe and Eastern Europe. So there is some insane logic to it, but they're right for the wrong reason. Like, it's because in Putin's mind, Trump was the closest thing to an allied American president that Putin's ever had, if that makes any sense whatsoever. That all being said, I do think that the plans were probably already in place in 2017, 2018, even going back as far as 2014. I think that it was probably even a strategic miscalculation. I mean, Trump wasn't even president there. Obama was president when Russia took Crimea in 2014 and started the insurrection in the Donbass region in the now LPR and DPR. It was a miscalculation on Putin's part to not have just taken the Ukraine by force at that time. I think if he could go back in time, he probably would have, because he would have ended up in a similar situation and might have even been more successful in his outcome. He almost probably waited too long to have done this act, if that using Putin logic. But
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking that why, when Trump and Putin were basically in bed together for those 4 years, why wouldn't have Putin just jumped at the opportunity? Because Trump would probably just been like, yeah, so those are Russian people, he's helping them. Like, he probably would have just furthered the misinformation and the narrative that Putin has developed.
I don't think as I think there's enough of the mainstream Republican element that is still anti-Russia, like going back to the Cold War times, that they still see them as like, the, like, apologize for the slur here, the mongrel communist horde that is the Soviet Union. There's still this like old school Republican element that still sees Russia in that light, that I don't think would have gone along with Trump's appeasement of Putin's actions in the Ukraine. Trump personally would have probably not given a shit. He would have, appeased the shit out of Putin's actions, maybe officially, condemned it. I think a great analogy is what happened with the Jamal Khashoggi incident, where Saudi Arabia, one of the crown prince, murdered an American journalist in Turkey. And then Trump, I keep saying Putin, and Trump was just like, well, what do you want me to do? I'm not going to go after Saudi Arabia. We have this Lockheed Martin weapons deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. We can't lose out on that. I think it would have been that model of it, but I also think that there would have been a lot of pushback within his own political party to have actually taken a stand against Putin, which that I don't think he would have been able to overcome. Maybe he would have. Maybe he really just did not give a shit and not cared about the internal political consequences of letting Putin just roll Ukraine at the time in like 2017, 2016, 2017, or 2017, 2018. Um, but I think it would have been a lot harder, a bigger pill for him to have swallowed. So I do think that Putin probably delayed this act while Trump was president, basically to appease Trump and not isolate a potential American ally who was willing to basically leave NATO and leave, Eastern Europe in the wind. Um, so, yeah.
I would probably challenge that thinking though, because what we've seen from Trump is that he is money driven 150%. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, and he had so much money tied up with Russia throughout the entirety of his presidency. I mean, he had just ties left and right with Russian banks that we're finding out about now.
Trump Tower Moscow.
Yeah, Trump Tower Moscow at the beginning, that was then placed on hold after some pressures, or at least it fizzled out of mainstream media at that point. But I don't think, given what we saw of Trump, that he would have given two shits about any Republican that was stood up against him. Because he believed that he was the totalitarian of the United States and that what he said was law. And he hadn't received any pushback really from the Republican Party even up through January 6th. I mean, he basically was able to do whatever the hell he wanted. So I feel that if Putin would have framed it right, Trump would have been right there, just kind of like, well, that's over there. We can't be involved. That has nothing to do with us. That's between Russia and Ukraine, or those people were Russians, and how dare Ukraine keep them from their sovereignty, But that's just my feeling, and probably my hatred for Trump and Trumpism and everything that has to do with that family.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you just said. I wholeheartedly 100% agree with that take on Trump's relationship with Putin. Yeah, I guess my sticking point is maybe you're absolutely right. Maybe Trump just would not have given a shit about the Republicans in his own party and the rest of the U.S. government, which I think would have probably been a lot more forceful, or tried to push for a much more forceful reaction to such an act.
Well, just because the show is called With a Gay Twist, there is some gay news that has happened since we've been recording that's
Oh my God.
so gay, it has to be shared. So you know how Putin, he's not big on the gays. He's not a fan.
You don't say. Except for his figure skaters.
They just haven't found the right woman yet, Samantha. They're not gay. They're just eccentric. So Ukrainian military forces are tracking Russian troop movements because the Russians are using Grindr. And because Grindr tells you geographic location, thank you. Now the Russian military forces are using Grindr to help track the movements by Russian troops. That is just the gayest thing, and I fucking love it.
That's the most aggressively male thing I've ever heard anyone say.
Oh, that's just too good.
Could this be a new way of cock blocking?
Yeah. Or just catfishing,
catfishing.
Oh, hey,
oh my gosh,
come meet at this club, and then this Russian regiment shows up, and then they just they all get just blown to shit.
I mean, you mean blown to shit in the bad way?
Yeah.
Yeah, not in the good way. It's like every time they have, the RNC, every time they have their convention to nominate people in that city, Grindr goes up by 30% or something. Oh my gosh.
I'm just gonna say one thing: log cabin Republicans.
Yes, for sure. So, we're to wrap up a bit here. I would say that for me, the thing that keeps me up at night is the idea that Putin and President Xi of China becoming buddy buddy. They're already pretty friendly, which is terrifying. But if they decided just to go full on in cahoots with each other, that seems to me very, very close to just the next Axis powers. And not to mention the fact that you've got, just on the other side of China, you've got Kim Jong un in North Korea, who would be so thrilled if he could sit at their table in the cafeteria. He would love that. And then the three of them together really is just absolutely terrifying. What do you see, Samantha, as maybe the future of this new power couple between those two? I know a big phrase that's been going around online and with political pundits has been today Ukraine, tomorrow Taiwan. So, do you see this as any sort of preamble to even larger movements?
And I just want to tie in really quick, Samantha, before we get your answer,
Sure.
because this is something else that I've been thinking about, is that Putin going after Ukraine, seeing the lack of formal, official military response from countries beyond Ukraine, not swooping in to provide direct military aid and offensive measures, kind of shows the lack of respect that NATO allies hold within the rest of the global community. So thinking about what China has been doing in the South China Sea, and looking at what they would love to do with Taiwan, just like Zach was saying, today Ukraine, tomorrow Taiwan. Do you think that Putin being this aggressive with Ukraine is going to embolden other countries to follow suit because they don't see a kind of a immediate gratification idea of not an immediate military offensive against them from other countries, so no global police existing?
Yeah. So much to unpack there. Yeah, that's probably a big fear on the part of the Biden administration and on the part of kind of the Western powers and kind of the larger global order of countries not respecting their borders and bigger bully countries. If you got the bigger stick, then you get to do whatever you want on the playground, and the playground being the entire world. So if Putin is left to do this to Ukraine unchecked, I definitely think that's going to lower the threshold, not just for China to take Taiwan, but almost in any other major border dispute or like international conflict areas where if a
Taiwan, Philippines, Malaysia,
yeah,
South Korea.
yeah, anywhere where like there's a potential for conflict to break out or that we've been trying to avoid like a conflict from breaking out, will now the likelihood, even between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, just that lowers the threshold for war to be the answer for disputes, and that's definitely a scarier world that we now unfortunately find ourselves in. That like that bar has been lowered, and I think regardless of what happens with the Ukraine, the outcome there, I think that we can't, Pandora's box has already been kind of opened on that. We've had this global order. Granted, the United States has unfortunately gotten involved in a lot of conflicts over like around the world, and sometimes from arguably an imperialist agenda. And with Iraq and Afghanistan, we can talk about why we went in Iraq and why we went in Afghanistan, and we do power projection around the world. But for the most part, there's been this global kind of a global peace, this understanding since World War II, um, that countries don't just invade other countries and don't just start fighting, like just
Well,
because they can.
Right. So I guess another question that kind of ties into this is what is this going to do with the conflict over Israel or between Israel and Pakistan? Because
You mean Israel and the
it's
Palestinians, right?
or yes, sorry, Israel and the Palestinians. I misspoke. But that's been a very tenuous situation that's been going on for God, how many years? And we've been in support of Israel. And so now with this show of non-force, is there going to be any implications that slide over into that conflict?
Um, can I go back to your Taiwan question though? Because I think
Oh, definitely.
that's definitely more of an analogy. So Zach brought up, is this going to bring like China and Russia closer together? There is a crazy amount of distrust between Russia and China, but at the same time, they do believe in sphere of influence geopolitics. Both of them kind of uh, they want that world order. They both see that. Can't even get the words right.
I
They
feel
both view the
like
world from a sphere of influence standpoint. Sorry, go for it, Nate.
Yeah, no, I feel like they operate together from the idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Sure,
But that's as far
100%.
as they kind of go with each other.
Yeah, yeah. But uh, I I think that the real difference is uh, I don't. If China were to decide one day to take Taiwan back through military force, if they decided to do that, I think the world would have less of an appetite to stop them than they even do with Russia and the Ukraine for a multitude of reasons. One, Taiwan is an island nation that's right off the coast of China. They don't border, you know, dozens of allies that are willing to funnel them arms and munition to fight the Chinese army. That's the first of all. Second of all, they're isolated even where they are. Like trying to get arms or trying to get support, humanitarian aid, you name it, to Taiwan to beat back a Chinese aggression. That's it's going to be almost impossible. Like the United States and Australia and some of our other allies in the region, we will probably try. We'll probably try to do something, but I don't necessarily think we'd be able to successfully be able to stop China or to kind of push the tide back if they even attempted a takeover of Taiwan. So putting those two pieces together, if Russia is successful in their Ukrainian mission, I think it emboldens China to do something like that to Taiwan. So to answer that, yes, that is Taiwan next? Yes, I probably see that on the horizon in the next probably within 5 years. Within 1 to 5 years, I can absolutely see the Chinese military, the PLA, People's Liberation Army, being strong enough and there's enough political will in China to just militarily take Taiwan. And I think it'll be a lot less bloody too than a conflict over the Ukraine based on territory size, based on just how much overwhelming force China would employ. We're not talking like 190,000 troops. We're talking like 1.9 million regular Chinese forces, like disembarking from ships onto Taiwan to take back the entire capital. So
I mean, they could just make a human bridge from mainland
yeah,
China to
yeah.
Taiwan and still have plenty of people, troops to just ransack the island.
Well, I'm gonna go take a Klonopin now, and and an edible. I don't know if those two things should be taken together, but that's what I'm feeling now. Well, Samantha, we cannot thank you enough for coming back for your second episode to pontificate so eloquently about all things Russian, all things militaristic, all things war. We are very, very appreciative of your knowledge and expertise and your time to join us today.
Cannot thank you enough, honestly.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, Mason, Zach. Like, it means a lot that y'all reach out to me, and you respect my inputs and appreciate them. And hopefully, your listeners will enjoy my rants and my spiels and my takes on things.
For sure. And that about does it for us here on the podcast this week. Thank you so much for listening. Samantha, where can people find you online?
Yeah, I have a Instagram. It's public. Anyone can follow me. It's mostly travel photos and basic white girl selfies. But I'm at Sebrida, Sebrida. It's my middle name. So find me there. Love to chat travel or politics or anything, really. So cool.
And they're fabulous photos, I have to say.
Uh,
I love seeing your photos that you post on your Instagram. They're fantastic.
oh, thank you.
Well, make sure to give us a follow over on social media. I'm at ZacharyPenn48.
And you can find me, Mason Dixon, at Real Mason Dixon.
You can also send us an email at withagaytwist@gmail.com. Make sure to give us a rating on your favorite podcast app so that other fabulous queens such as yourself can find us. And remember, being queer
Is political.
Later.
Bye, girl.